Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Chappie from CFP's College Football Podcast. And today we're going to give you our realignment proposal. Now, this is something that I've been working on for a little bit, and I've been really excited to release it. Talked about it on our last podcast, episode 8, where we talked about your traditional 2-in, 2-out realignment within the Power 5. Well, now we're going to change the whole landscape of college football. That's right. We're going to reshape the FBS group of teams, and we're not even going to keep all of them that they have. So before we get into that, I want to let you know that you can find us on Twitter. I am at champion_lit. And you can go to our website, www.cfpcollegefootball.com. A lot of facts, figures, information, previews, articles, blogs, a lot of things to help you get that college football fix as we move closer into the regular season. But to quote the good man Josh Pate at Late Kick Josh, he says that there is no offseason, and I fully agree, and I think any college football fan can stand by that. But let's move forward, and let's take a look at how it's going to go. So starting with alignment. First of all, we're going to pare it down to 120 teams. So currently they're at 130. That means we got to boot 10 of them. And how do we figure that out? Well, the criteria is going to be based on the average ranking of your win percentage from the last 20 years. So basically since the year 2000 up until last season, where do you rank in terms of winning percentage? So not overall wins, because we know that there are some schools, some programs that have only been in the FBS level for less than a decade. And then there are some who have been there since the turn of the century. And I'm talking the 20th century, not 21st. So 120 gives us 12 conferences with 10 teams each. I think that's a nice even number to where you can have an even number of conferences and an even number of teams in each conference. And that's also going to help with scheduling, which we'll get to in just a minute. Now, what about a team that might get bumped down? Or what about a team that is playing really well at the FCS level and wants to work their way up? They can petition to be in that FBS 120 every 4 years. So every 4 years, there will be a panel that kind of looks at it and reevaluates where we're at and who deserves to stay, who deserves maybe to move up a tier, who maybe deserves to move down a tier, and who deserves to be brought down to the FCS level, at least for the next foreseeable future, until things are improved financially and also with their overall product. Now, we talk about tiers and divisions. So I propose that we divide it into 2 tiers. So instead of the way it is right now, I think instead of, we kind of have it where we've got an upper level, if you will, and a lower level. But I think to make it a little bit more language friendly and a little bit more inclusive, we go with a champions tier, which is pretty much like the Power 5 is today, and a challengers tier. And we'll get to talking about why those names make sense in a minute. Now, you can meet to realign tiers every 4 years and base it on winning percentage and enrollment. Again, kind of looking at the overall quality, the state of the programs, the state of the conferences, and determine, whether a specific team should move up or whether they should move down. So it would look kind of like this. You've got your FBS, and a little bit higher are the champions teams, which, again, make up an even 60 teams. And they typically would be composed of what is, for the most part, today's Pac-12, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, and ACC. So those Power 5 conferences. But then you're going to redistribute, and you're going to create a 6th conference known as the Heartland Conference. And we'll look at those teams and where they lie in just a moment. But you've got 60 teams in that quote-unquote upper level. And then you've got this challengers tier, which is a slight step down in terms of overall success and history. It's not to slight the teams or the schools or the programs at all, certainly not the players or the coaches, but you've got your Mountain West, Sun Belt, MAC, American Athletic Conference, and Conference USA. And then now you add this 6th conference known as the Great Plains Conference, which geographically is very similar to the makeup of the Big 12. And that gets into how do we come up with these divisions? How do we come up with these conferences? Well, primarily it's geographic, so that way it saves cost on travel. It makes it a little bit easier for fans to travel and support their teams and not have to go all the way across the country, like they were talking about potentially adding Boise State to the American Athletic Conference, and then you're faced with going over almost 3 time zones to watch that team. So scheduling, how does scheduling look? Well, Each conference has 10 teams, so that makes it easy to play 9 conference games and 3 non-conference games to stay with that 12-game regular season schedule. Now, within that, each team must play FBS teams as part of their non-conference. So no more SEC scheduling the Citadel or scheduling an FCS opponent in November when a lot of those other conferences are in the thick of their conference races and they're fighting in November against those conference foes. You're going to have a chance to prove your merit. So there's no divisions within each conference. There's no splitting up. So there's no argument over well, this division's number 2 is much better than the other division's number 1. You've got 9 teams with you in that conference, and you're going to play all 9. Now, each conference is going to play 2 divisional crossovers. So again, looking geographically, a team from that Pacific region, from the Champions Division, the slightly higher tier, will play against a Great Plains team from that Champions Division. So essentially, it's Power 5 playing Power 5 if you're going to use today's terminology. Now, also, that gives you 2 of your 3 non-conferences. You're also going to play the cross-tier crossover games. So essentially what that equates to is you've got a slightly upper-level team playing a slightly lower-level team, or in other words, a team from that Central East geographic region in the Upper Champions Division is going to play against the Central East team in the Challenger Division. Now, you can do it that way, or you could be scheduled to where you are playing up or down a division, but you're playing somebody outside of your geographic region. That way it allows for maybe some of those slight rivalries or those pseudo rivalries that really started to take shape under the current or recent conference alignments. But now because of the realignment here, maybe they don't get that chance to play them year in and year out. So here again is what it would look like. So let's take a team from the Big Ten, and I'm using that because I live in Big Ten country. So Big Ten team A, let's say, they're going to be in this upper tier with teams from the Pac-12, Big 12, Heartland, SEC, and ACC. So 9 of those games on a Big Ten team schedule is going to be against their Big Ten foes. Makes sense, right? Then you're going to play 2 non-conference games against other champions or upper tier conference opponents. So you might play a team from the Pac-12 and a team from the SEC, or you might play a team from the ACC and the Heartland. And then your third non-conference game is that crossover, not or tier crossover game against someone from the Challenger Division. So someone from the Big Ten in this example would play a team from the Mountain West or the Great Plains or the MAC or wherever it might be. Now, continuing on with scheduling. Championship week. This is where I think that this could be an improvement. You're going to pair off the number 1s, number 2s, number 3s, and so forth from each of the champions divisions. So the number 1 team from the Big Ten would play off against the number 1 team from, let's say, the SEC. Now, how they determine that, you could go with a round robin predetermined format to where you say, okay, this year the SEC is playing the Big Ten in crossovers in championship week. The next season, the Big Ten's playing the ACC. Or you could have it evaluated every year and take and match it up by winning percentage. So the conference with the best winning percentage would play against either the 6th best winning percentage within your tier, or maybe you match it up against number 1 and number 2, number 3 and number 4, number 5 and number 6. However they determine it. I think for football product and football quality, it's best to go 1 against 2, 2 against 3, or 3 against 4. And again, we're talking winning percentage versus winning percentage. So you've got every team playing in the championship week against a different conference opponent, but that matches up on the same level. So 1 against 1, 2 against 2, and so forth. And you do the same for the Challengers Division as well. So down in the MAC, the Mountain West, the Sun Belt, you would take the number 1 team from each of those conferences and pair them up with a number 1 team from another conference within that Challengers tier, within that Challengers Division. Now, in terms of, what about those FCS schools that are their lifeblood is to play these bigger schools and make money and make a big paycheck? Well, again, I'm going to take from somebody that I respect a lot, Josh Pate from the Late Kick podcast. You can follow him at Late Kick Josh on Twitter. But he said, why don't, instead of having spring games where it's inter squad and you're really only seeing a portion of the players who are healthy and that's it. It's really just a glorified practice. Well, why not schedule 2 opponents from the FCS ranks and have that in lieu of an intra-squad spring game? So maybe you've got Clemson playing the Citadel in one of their spring games, and you can play one in April and then another one in May, or one in April and one again in June, however it's going to be, because let's face it, those players are pretty much there all throughout the year anyway. And that way, both schools can still profit from it. You can televise it. You do get a little bit of work. And I would even propose that the rules are lessened a little bit. Maybe you have quick whistles on quarterbacks. Maybe you have it a thud format. So I'm perfectly fine with them altering the rules and having a specific type of rules for that spring scrimmage, or maybe it's a running clock, or however you want to do it to protect your players. And again, if coaches want to keep certain players out, that's fine. So yeah, maybe you're seeing a number 2 squad of Clemson going against a number 1 squad from the Citadel, and that's still okay because you're still getting that work and you're still able to sell tickets. And you can't tell me that college football fans are not going to go and pay to see a preseason or a mid-season scrimmage, again, because following Mr. Pate, I don't want to use that O word. So you could still do it that way. Now, in terms of playoffs and postseason and bowl games, I think this would force the hand to change slightly the postseason format. So I am not somebody who's sitting here saying that 4 teams is a bad format. I think it's worked out well. But I also think that there is an equal value with having 6 teams. And now, since you've got 6 champions from those champions tier and the challengers tier, you have 2 standalone brackets, 2 separate brackets. So the champions tier is going to be playing for the quote unquote national championship in college football. But then you've got that challengers, or in other words, what we would call today the group of 5. They're playing in a playoff bracket for the Challengers Cup. And we'll show what that looks like in just a minute. But you take the top 2 seeds that are ranked by a panel, and they get first round buys. So the number 3 and 4 seeds would then host a home game at a site of their choice. So they can play it on campus, or if they want to go and play at a nearby professional venue, or if they want to play at any other venue, it would be up to that team to make those arrangements, assuming that they would get, about a month or so to work that out. So let's say that Northwestern wins and they want to play at a site that's a little bit larger than Ryan Field. Maybe they could schedule it at Soldier Field in Chicago, or maybe they schedule it at Lambeau Field in Green Bay. Wherever they might want to be, they get the choice of the host site. Or if they want to go and play in warmer weather and feel that that's going to give them maybe a little bit more of an advantage, they can schedule it in a more southern city if they choose. Now, the final 4 games will be played at rotating neutral sites, but here's the caveat. One of them has to be at a predetermined northern site and a predetermined southern site. So figure the Mason-Dixon line. One of those semifinal games has to be north of there. One of them has to be south. And the reason I say that is because of fans not having to travel all the way down south when you're in the north. But I think also it would be great to see a southern team have to travel north and play in those cold elements against a team from Wisconsin, or a team from Minnesota, or a team from Idaho, wherever that might be. And then the championship site, as always, is going to be predetermined. So it would look kind of like this. Again, you've got 4 and 5 with 4 hosting, 3 and 6 with 6 hosting, or I'm sorry, with number 3 hosting. And then those winners pair off against the 1 and the 2 in a predetermined site. And how would that work? Well, the number 1 seed would get to choose which site they want to travel to, whether they want to go to the north or whether they want to go to the south. So let's say Ohio State gets the number 1 seed and they want to play in that northern city, they get that first choice. And then the number 2 seed, let's say for sake of argument, it is Alabama. Alabama then would take the other one. If Ohio State wants to play in a southern site and kind of force Alabama to play in a colder climate that's already predetermined, they can do that. That might be a real interesting take on, gamesmanship and on coaching strategy to see, do you want to stay local for you, or do you want to force the other seed to play maybe a little bit out of their element and see what happens, how that shakes out. So I think that could be pretty interesting. So if we use this year's projections as an example, and again, these are not necessarily my final 6, but if you were to go and look at all those conferences, which I'm going to unveil here in just a minute, let's say you've got Alabama and then Clemson. I'm sorry, Alabama at number 1, and then you've got Ohio State and Texas A&M playing for the right to face off against the Crimson Tide, right? So, and then you can see how the rest shakes out, and you'll notice that the semifinal games are already located in those cities next to the number 1 and the number 2 seeds. Now, we talked about the challengers tier, so we don't want to leave them out. And anytime you can get more football, that's going to create more money. It's going to create more revenue. So I think that having that second playoff bracket is a great idea. And I'm certainly not the one who came up with it. I'm borrowing from a lot of other intelligent people who talked about that. But you would play in an off schedule. So playing either in the middle of the week or playing at a time where it's not going to interfere with that other bracket at the top. And the winner would be crowned the Challengers Cup champion, right? And that can go towards helping give them some cachet and putting it on a resume to then petition and maybe be bumped up to that champions division. So if, let's say, a school like UCF wins the Challengers Cup 2 out of 3 years, and they think that they should be up in the SEC or the ACC in place of a team that has finished either at number 11 or at number 9 or number 10 perennially in the last 4 years, maybe that switch can happen. Now, the challenger can be added and can be put into the champions bracket. So we're going to leave that open, but they have to have no less than 1 loss, and they have to have beaten their champions tier opponent during that crossover. So again, if UCF is crossing over and playing Georgia, even if UCF goes 11-1 and they win their championship week, if they lost to a champions tier team like Georgia, but they beat everybody else in the challengers tier, then it's not good enough. So the door is open for them to do that, but essentially they'd have to run the table and go undefeated or have 1 loss, but maybe that 1 loss was to a champion from across them. So a horizontal opponent as opposed to a vertical opponent, which they have beaten. Ergo, an example, UCF beats Georgia from the upper tier, but maybe they lose in a last-second contest against Louisiana, who ended up being the champion of their division or their conference. That would still open the door for UCF, provided that they are voted in by this panel or this committee that's going to look at that and say, well, even though they had 1 loss to Louisiana, it was by 1 point in overtime, and they beat Georgia, who finished with 11 wins themselves. So the opportunity is still there. So here's what the Challengers Cup would look like. You would have a school like Louisiana and Boise State with the top 2 seeds, and notice the sites next to them. Louisiana, if the predetermined sites were Atlanta, Georgia, and Landover, Maryland, Louisiana might say, well, we're going to stay closer to home and we're going to choose to play in Georgia, or they could choose to play out in Landover, Maryland, and force Boise to come all the way to play in Atlanta, which we've seen Boise do before. And then you've got Memphis and SMU with the 3 and 4 seeds hosting at their site that they choose, whether it's at the Liberty Bowl in Memphis or it's at Ford Stadium in Dallas, or whether they choose to play somewhere else. Maybe SMU wants to play in the Cotton Bowl. Maybe SMU wants to play in the Jerry Dome in Arlington. They get to choose where they want to host, provided that they're allowed to play there. So that's how the Challengers Cup would look like. So same number of games, and you would still have a winner, and you could still have rankings. So at the end of it all, there would still be the rankings, and us college football faithful, we can argue about it. We can say this is right, this is not right. So you're still going to have that. And I think it still makes the regular season just as exciting, if not more exciting. So I still don't get the argument where some people will claim that if you move to 6, it's going to take away the allure of the regular season. And I do understand that, this could be a little bit of, if you give an inch, it's eventually going to go to a mile. Well, I think you can still hold on to this and say, we're going to, it's working with 6 now under this new format that Chappie produced and threw out to us. and we're going to keep this, and this should work for a long time. There's really no need to expand to further than that. Now, bowl games would still exist. So bowl games would be played among other teams that didn't qualify for playoff brackets. So you could still have the same number of bowl games. You could still have the qualifiers of you have to be at least 500, or if you're 5-7, you have to petition. And then a panel or a committee looks at that and says, okay, your 5 wins. One of them was against a champions team. 3 others were against teams who finished in second place within their division. So there's still that. So the same bowl format exists as it normally would. So you ready to see the realignment? I know you are. That's why you tuned in. So here we go with it. In our champions division, and if you look at the top, they're essentially broken up into geographic location in addition to history and success and quality of that program, at least within the last 20 years. So Pac-12, you've got Arizona, Arizona State, Cal, Oregon, Oregon State, Stanford, UCLA, USC, Washington, Washington State. So you still have essentially much of the Pac-12 the way it was, except Colorado and Utah move over to the Big 12. So joining them in the Big 12 are Baylor, BYU, Kansas State, Nebraska coming over from the Big 10, TCU, Texas A&M coming back over from the SEC. So you get that Texas A&M rivalry, and then Texas Tech as well. So within that, you pretty much have the Big 12 as it was, but you put in BYU and you put in Utah as opposed to Missouri and Iowa State like it used to be. Now in this new Heartland Conference, again, this is kind of middle of America. You've got Arkansas coming from the SEC, Illinois, Iowa coming over from the Big 10, Iowa State from the Big 12, Minnesota from the Big 10, Missouri coming back from the SEC. So it's really a combination of Big 12 and Big 10 as it used to be before realignment back about almost 10 years ago. Joining them in the Heartland are Northwestern, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Wisconsin. So again, you still have a lot of those traditional rivalries. A group from the Big 10, a group from the Big 12, and former Big 8. So, and you pull also a couple teams from the SEC. So like Arkansas and Missouri have familiarity with each other, and they're geographically close to one another. And again, part of why it's smart to do it geographically is it's a moneymaker. You're saving on travel, you're saving on cost, but you're also giving your fans the opportunity to travel, which is going to generate more revenue for you as well. In the Big 10, we've got the traditional Big 10 teams, Indiana, Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Penn State, Purdue. But then you bring also Cincinnati, who is an Ohio school, so that fits with Ohio State. You bring Notre Dame from the Independence/ACC. And again, I think this is really more of a geographic cause more than anything else. But then you also bring over Pittsburgh, so they join Penn State as a second team from that great state of Pennsylvania. And then West Virginia, which borders Pennsylvania, and you still have that backyard brawl rivalry with West Virginia and Pitt. In the SEC, pretty much like it was, but you're bringing over Georgia Tech from the ACC, and you're also bringing Louisville from the AAC. But again, this was done to try and see, this is not just for football, but if you look at other revenue sports or sports at least that can do well and attract eyeballs on TV screens, Louisville is a pretty successful program in their basketball teams as well as baseball and softball. So you get that, but you also get that geographic proximity and closeness also. So Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Kentucky, LSU, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, and Tennessee from the SEC. And then, of course, you bring over Louisville and Georgia Tech. Now, in the ACC, you've got Clemson, Duke, Florida State, Miami, NC State, North Carolina, Virginia, Virginia Tech. Those schools don't change conferences, but you bring over Florida from the SEC to join with Florida State and keep that rivalry. They also join Miami. So those 3 Florida schools. And you also bring South Carolina over from the SEC. So I think that that's probably a good move for the Gamecocks. I think that this ACC, as we see it on our screen here, is a little bit more competitive, perhaps, than where South Carolina was at their place in the SEC. So that's our champions division, or the upper tier. So taking most of the group of 5 or the Power 5 teams and you sprinkle in a couple others to get to 60 total in that upper tier. Now, in the challengers division, or if you want to look at it and rank them, yeah, they would be the second tier, slightly below the champions tier. But again, going by geographic location, so you'll notice that we still have geographic sections of the Pacific, the Great Plains, Heartland, Midwest, Central, East, and Atlantic, same as they were in the Champions Division. But now you've got programs that historically are not as on par with the Champions School. So in the Mountain West, which is that Pacific group, you've got Boise State, Fresno State, Hawaii, Nevada, New Mexico, San Diego State, San Jose State, UNLV, Utah State, and Wyoming. In the Great Plains, you have Air Force, Colorado State, Houston, Kansas. We're bringing in North Dakota State because of all the success that they've had really in the last 20 years, particularly the last decade, and they're replacing any number of those other 10 schools or 11 schools that were kind of near the bottom of FBS. They join North Texas, SMU, Texas State, Tulsa, and UT San Antonio. So you really have a mix of the Mountain West, but you also take some of those Texas schools from the Sun Belt Conference, from the AAC, from Conference USA, and I think geographically that works. And so if you look at it, you've got a former Power 5 school like Kansas that might be in a little bit more of a competitive league here. And I know KU fans are thinking, well, what about basketball? This is not going to be a great place for them to play basketball in. Well, just ask Gonzaga and just ask Houston about whether they need to play in a quote unquote power conference or whether they can do just fine in being in a slightly lower conference in terms of perception anyway, not in terms of quality, but in terms of public perception. See how they feel about it and whether that makes a difference or not. Moving over to the Heartland geographic area, which would be our Sun Belt Conference. You've got Arkansas State, Ball State coming from the MAC, and really that's because the MAC got a little bit crowded. We had to move some people over, and Ball State was really the furthest team to the west of all those MAC schools to try and keep things even. They are joined by Georgia State, Louisiana, Louisiana Tech, Northern Illinois, also from the MAC. So I said Ball State was the furthest west. I meant to say Northern Illinois was furthest west, but after Northern Illinois, which is a little bit more of an easier pick, Ball State was the next closest school. And they join Southern Miss, Troy, Tulane, and UAB. So again, you look at this and you're still getting a good amount of those traditional rivalries, but even without. So if you look at, say, Northern Illinois and, Central Michigan, Eastern Michigan, or Western Michigan, they want to keep some of those old MAC rivalries. That's an easy cross-conference within your tier, non-conference game that you can schedule. So Northern Illinois can schedule to play a MAC team every year. Air Force can schedule to play Colorado State can schedule to play Wyoming every year, going from Great Plains to Mountain West. So that way you can keep that boot trophy rivalry game going. So the MAC, we've got Akron, Bowling Green, Central Michigan, Eastern Michigan, Kent State, Miami of Ohio, Toledo, and Western Michigan. And we bring over Temple from the American Athletic Conference. Now, Temple spent a couple years in the MAC in the early 2000s. I think geographically and in terms of competition, I think that still fits. Again, we had to pull some teams from the more eastern conferences in the eastern geographic areas, and they seem the best fit to fall in with those other MAC teams. The AAC, in that Central East geographic region, you've got Army and Navy. So Army and Navy should have been in a conference together for a long time. Now they are. They're joined with Army Southern, so you've got another triple option team. I think that would be a lot of fun to watch, all three of those triple option teams in the same conference. You've got Liberty, who comes from the Independents, and they've done very well in the last few years. Marshall, who's been a traditional power since joining FBS in 1997. Memphis from the AAC, Middle Tennessee State. And then you get Rutgers, Maryland, and Syracuse from the former Power 5 conferences. But I think this is going to be a better situation for all three of those schools, especially Maryland and Rutgers, not having to play against Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan State on a perennial basis. Now they've got a lot more competitive avenue. And I think that's going to help with their recruiting as well. And then finally in Conference USA, spanning that Atlantic, or that, along the Atlantic coast there on the eastern side of the United States, you've got Appalachian State, Boston College, Coastal Carolina, East Carolina, Florida Atlantic, and Florida International. So those two rivals. South Florida and UCF, also rivals on the battle for I-4, or the war for I-4, I should say. And then Wake Forest and Vanderbilt. So you look at some of those schools like Boston College, Wake Forest, and Vanderbilt, who have kind of been thugged by the Giants and thumped by some of the Giants in the ACC and the SEC. Now they're in a little bit more of a competitive avenue, playing against some of those geographically close schools, but still able to pull in some of the top talent that's within their geographic range. So that's our Challengers division, or in other words, that second tier. So there you have it. That's our college football realignment proposal. We looked at all the conferences. We looked at splitting into tiers. We looked at how you're going to schedule it. We looked at how that's going to affect the playoffs and the postseason. And if you look at this, I think it works for a few reasons. Number one, you're going to get more exposure. There's going to be more games now, slightly more games, not a great abundance. So really no team is playing more than 15 games, and that's going to be the max. This is going to, with the realignment, when I say more exposure, it's going to allow fans the opportunity to travel a little bit easier. It's going to bring in more revenue. And that TV deals are going to happen no matter what conference you're in. And the money continues to roll in for college football. I think it's only going to get more and more. So that's going to work. You've got more choice of, with a greater chance of winning, that might spread recruiting, right? So we talked about a school like Maryland, which has recruited pretty well, but if they are now on a more competitive playing field and they're competing for titles, or you take a look at a school like Appalachian State, if they're beating some of those schools like UCF and Rutgers and Syracuse on a consistent basis, that's going to help with their recruiting. So I think this is going to spread recruiting out a little bit more evenly because of the level playing field that you're on now. You've got that symmetry. You've got some of that equity that is dispersed. And then also, it certainly helps with ease of schedule. So this format sets up to where you don't have to necessarily plan a schedule out 5, 10, 15 years in advance. It can be something done much like the NFL model. So in the NFL, they basically say, okay, we're going to have this division play against this division in some of their games this year. So teams are going to play each other, but they're also going to, it's kind of set up. And I think that's going to make scheduling a lot easier. And again, I'm going to go to Josh Pate's calendar and say that could be a big marketable thing for college football, to unveil the schedules in the spring sometime, right around after, spring practice takes a break, or after that first FBS, FCS, game or scrimmage, whatever you want to call it. I think that could work out, and it would be an exciting thing. I mean, we just saw that the NFL is marketing their schedule release, and it's going to draw a lot of eyeballs. I think that college football could do equally as well, if not more so. And that's going to, also really help ticket sales, because if a fan has no idea who is on the slate for the next year, and then they find out in April, they've been itching for it. They've been wanting it and yearning it. And now all of a sudden they say, okay, we're playing Ohio State. I'm going to go get tickets right now. That recency bias. Whereas if they know about it 3 years in advance, out of sight, out of mind, it kind of loses its luster a little bit. So I think there's that, it's kind of like the whole Black Friday idea. If I know that it's here right now and I know it's on sale and I know it's a hot item, I'm going to want to go and get it, as opposed to just saying, well, I'll go and get it another time. Now, I'm saying some people might say that. Myself, I'm not somebody who buys into all that, but I know that it's a pretty big thing. So again, thoughts, feel free to email me at cfpcollegefootball@gmail.com. Check out our website, cfpcollegefootball.com, and you can find me and DM me, or you can send me your agreements or your disgust, if it might be. On Twitter, I'm at @champion_lit. So again, this has been Chappie, and this is our college football realignment proposal for the very near future. I'm Chappie, and that's what I know.